So, welcome to our podcast. We often really get excited about big winners, but today we're going to take the opposite and talk about big losers. Of course, this is from a strategic standpoint that we're going to talk about losers, where, it's all our opinion. Um, but there is a theme. Whenever we start a session, we always talk about what we call a gas gauge, and it's either you're very inside out, all the way to market aware, market driven, market driving. And when we really think through that lens, we start to look at what we call very inside out, and that's the graveyard that we like to talk about, which is Blockbuster, Nokia, BlackBerry, Kmart. There's a slew of them that are there. Then there's this interesting group that kind of is next, and we're calling them bouncers for a lack of, there's some redemption that is occurring potentially. And this week we're listening to Harley-Davidson. They sold off 10% of their business. I mean, this was once the darling of everyone. I mean, tattoos and everything. And it was market driving. They really connected in ways that everyone else wished they could with their customers. And it's just fizzled, and now they're selling off part of their company, not strategically, just because they need to raise more cash. So there's a huge question mark on them. And Southwest, for a long time, thought that their point of difference was not having reserved seats. And then somebody, an active investor, said, hey, guess what? People do want to pay more for a reserved seat, and you can make more money charging for bags too. So they're in the midst of a bounce back potentially. So those are some examples. Anyone want to throw in what you think next?
Go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really delicious theme, this. It's really got some legs because there's so many businesses, and we don't celebrate failure. We don't sit on the sidelines laughing at how somebody got it wrong, but trying to understand the ingredients of that lack of success. What is it that goes wrong? And the themes around that, and I think you're right, Mary, this idea that there's not just absolute failure, there's often a reversal followed by a new version of whatever the idea was. Maybe these things have some opportunities, but they need to go through a period of reversal to get there. I think it doesn't just apply to mainstream businesses that have a long and storied history. Even startups can get it wrong, or new products can get it wrong. Maybe as we go through this, we can talk about Exubera, the Pfizer inhaled insulin product was a great innovation, but didn't have a user base. Or Quibi, the video short form professionally produced videos for commuters for watching TV while you stand in line sort of offer. And that spectacularly crashed, although the content survived. So that was another bounce of sorts because their content survived. So yeah, I think there's a lot of ways of looking at this, a lot of interesting ideas.
I think to me, the interesting thing is to say what happens to these companies. They have these cultures that are largely very customer centric during, the success stage. And then something happens. I don't know if it's hubris. I don't know if it's a change in management with a different idea of what success looks like. But it appears that they sort of lose what made them so successful. I mean, it's interesting to me. We look all the time at just positioning statements that companies had at one time, like FedEx, when it absolutely positively has to be there overnight, which was not their, it hasn't been their tagline since the 1980s. But we all that were around then remember it. And you say that something that this absolutely positions the company so powerfully, what happened, and it's probably just, new management, right? Somebody that comes in and says, well, I want to put my mark on this, and we don't want to seem like we're old. And maybe you throw out some of the things that really made you successful, especially those things that really benefited customers. We had a partner in our group named Tom Niehaus. Hi, Tom, if you're listening out there. He's retired now. And Tom used to talk about the stages of the companies. He would say, when the marketers are in charge, that's usually a pretty good thing. At least the whatever function is most focused on the customer. If they're making the decisions, it's usually a pretty good thing. But when certain functions start to take over, it's the end. And, he would say, well, I'm sorry if you're in finance, the finance people take over, you know, and everything becomes about money, and you stop investing in the things that make long-term customer equity happen, you're in really bad shape, and you got to try to wrestle it back from there. And he used to always say that. Again, hi, any lawyers out there, attorneys, when the lawyers get in charge, it's over. And you're really all about trying to protect, whatever you need to maybe conduct a fire sale. But I think the idea around comebacks is when companies start to realize that they've, like Southwest, that they've got out of touch with evolving customer needs. And if they save that, and if they say, look, we've lost our way for a little bit, but now here we go. We understand that there's, a new, set of needs that customers want, and they start to appeal that. They oftentimes are these comeback stories. And that's what I think hopefully is going on with Southwest, been an amazingly customer-centric culture to this point.
Yeah, I'm going to say something about that. But you know what's interesting about Southwest is, and because I like your question, why is it the companies either slip into this abyss or, I don't know, however they end up there. Southwest believed that their point of differentiation was no reserve seats, and they held on to it so tight. And so if you're in a company and, the old timers are saying, this is what we are, we can't lose our core, it really is dangerous. Now, in the company, Southwest had done research, and the research said, yes, customers really do want assigned seats. They're willing to pay for it. And they sat on that research for a long time. So even when they asked their customers, they still didn't want to change, because in their heart, they felt that that was what was made them different.
Made them strong. It was a SWAT, right? I mean,
oh, yeah. Yep.
Okay. So, we're pretty, at least amongst the people that know us, we're known as maybe a anti-SWAT. And we're not really anti-SWAT. We just think that what happens with SWAT is you consider something a strength, and you hold on to that strength, and it shows up in your strategy year over year over year over year, long after it becomes something that really does address a customer need. And that's what the Southwest story reminds me of. It's like, no, that's what we're strong at. And, but fact is that it doesn't matter if customers don't recognize you for that strength and perceive you positively because you have that strength. What does it matter? Why would you invest in it?
Maybe the truth is, slightly controversial statement. By the way, I'm enjoying you alienating all these groups of people on this podcast. We've had lawyers, we've had finance people, now we've had people that use SWAT. You're just basically just carving people off from your social network.
I realize that it'll be a two-person podcast probably as early as next week.
You're going to have to do some.
Thanks, it's
some
been great.
Up now, very, very, very soon.
Yeah.
Here's the controversial take. Maybe companies aren't commonly customer centric. Maybe they're product centric, and they found a product that customers really liked, whether that was Blockbuster with their range of videos you could pick up on a Friday night, or maybe that was Southwest and their slightly chaotic boarding system, but ultimately cheap prices get you there safely with a smile on your face, make sure people are happy with the experience. But maybe they fall in love with the product itself, and they lose sight of how things evolve and change. Because a truly customer-centric business would always be looking at what the customers are perceiving, what they're getting, what their alternatives and choices are, and build around that. And I just wonder whether we sometimes hand out that accolade of being customer-centric a little bit too easily, because it probably requires more evidence than just having an historical product that customers liked, right? I mean, maybe that's the reality that we have to be less generous with that praise.
Well, I like what you're saying. And what some companies that we work with are doing is they're doing a website audit. And okay, so I'm going to say AI. We're what, 10 minutes in, and I'm going to say AI, but they use AI as a way to look at all of the different websites, theirs and then their competitors, and ask them how attribute driven or benefits driven they are, or even values. If you've worked with us, the attributes are what we make or what our competitors make. Benefits, regardless of who does what, this is what the customer wants from anyone, and then the values are what drives them, the emotional part of that, why they care. And when you do that type of an analysis on yourself and your competitors, and you feed in those three definitions, it comes back pretty fast. And it's a mirror that you hold up to your company to go, yes, you're very product driven and attribute driven, or yes, you seem to care about the customer and there's benefits that are important to them in your statements that you're making. So I like that as a litmus test. If you're at all curious, if you fall in the dungeon of what Sean's describing, or if you're, a little bit more evolved in your company.
I like what Sean's saying too, but for a different reason. You know, almost every company that we work with, or many of them, basically have products that they were excited about, that maybe R&D came up with, maybe that just evolved, in a certain way, and they struggle because the products are falling well short of expectations because they haven't found the market. So we benefit from that. But what I think happens just real practically is, okay, Sean, you talked about, some companies that just basically got it right from the beginning. They got a product that seemed, that hit all the right notes, and we praise them as being customer centric, right? That's probably a very, very small percentage, right? Another percentage is companies that have all of these products that they, thought were cool and just haven't found their mark. But basically what happens when you apply customer centric thinking to those products that are under potentialized, they end up looking different. They maybe it's a whole different market that they end up being successful in. Maybe it's a whole different way of talking about them than they have been, that ultimately unlocks success. And so there's like this big pivot that has to happen. And that is interesting to me because they say something like 70% of startups have to pivot from their original idea. So if you kind of look at your portfolio of products as like the underpotentialized ones as sort of like startups, and you apply customer centric sort of thinking and tools to that basically becomes the pivot, right? That allows you to either find the success that the product is destined for, or in some cases, finding out that it's just not a good idea and that you should kill it and stop wasting resources on that particular product line and put your eggs in a different basket.
Somebody told me, I was doing a lot of forecasting, and my boss at the time, we were doing like really fancy coffee makers or something. And I had done a forecast, and the forecast was huge. And he started laughing. He goes, "You are not thinking like customers." He says, because in this case, the West Coast and the East Coast really would love this new fancy coffee maker. But the middle America, which I had given them a lot of credit for buying the coffee makers, wasn't going to do it because, I wasn't that customer. And I think what happens is when you are in a company, sometimes you aren't thinking about the world the way a customer would. You're thinking the way you would. There's some cool technology, this is great, it does all these things, and you're like, oh, I love it. But the fact is that you may not be that customer that you're trying to sell to. So
yeah, and that goes back to them. And I know just lately all roads lead to AI, but for us all roads always lead to segmentation. And that's another good example of when we're thinking of customers and their needs, and we say you're customer centric, we have to remember that the customer isn't like some large collective. Customer invariably is segments of customers. And sometimes what you're offering is tailored to those segments. So rather than looking for a universal offer to all customers, which is very difficult, maybe in some categories it's possible, but in reality, the art is to find that significant addressable segment that you can tailor an offer to that resonates with what they truly care about. And that's what realistic customer centricity looks like. It's through a segmentation lens, typically.
It's good. Yeah.
I think that, this discussion has helped me to see that what goes off the rails for companies that were really successful is fundamentally they lose sight of evolving customer needs and its related concept, which is trends, right? Trends. I think the way that we talk about trends these days, it's a little more evolved over the last couple of years, is we evaluate the trends that are, impacting or likely to impact your market. But what we do is a further translational step that says, how is this trend likely to change customer needs, right? So trends and customer needs, I think in our parlance these days, are really related. And it just seems that what happens to these companies that lose their way is they get locked in on what they think the market needs. And they lose sight of the fact that things change, people change, tastes change. And so I think the biggest insurance policy against, you know, losing your success is to be almost militant about keeping your finger on the pulse in an unbiased way on evolving customer needs and how trends are impacting those.
Yeah. And to add to what you're saying, in those segments that exist and
Absolutely,
how,
because that leads to
yeah.
segmentation and new emerging segments or changing importance for a company of a segment that maybe in the past they thought were not in their target, but maybe are now, and vice versa.
Exactly. Well, we hope that you have a few ideas, and we really appreciate. We get some really fun emails back from people saying, hey, did you think about this? We are always open to any feedback that you have. So thank you very much.
Thank you.